What shapes your attitudes, your approach to life? Well, your experience. What shapes your experience? The world around you. And so many of your beliefs and your attitudes and your ways of coping with the world have something to do with where you grew up, where you learned the first things in life, and what came afterwards, how you learned to survive, to work, to prosper, to do things. Everything is a skill, techne, right? Even basic life. Now, if you know somebody that grew up in a time of hardship, say the Great Depression in the United States, or perhaps they grew up in the Soviet Union, this is a 10 ruble note from the Soviet Union, you might know that they have a very different approach to life in general. This is important because one of the features of the Western world, the, the developed world, is that there are business cycles. Now, these business cycles actually are something that goes way back to antiquity. They were described in the Bible. In fact, the story of Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat is a story of conquering business cycles. In this case, it was a highly agricultural society, so the cycles that they saw were largely based on sun conditions, etc., the growing seasons. And what Pharaoh was advised by Joseph was to store up grain during good times so that it would be available in the coming bad times. Okay, Joseph was essentially the first economist, and he predicted there would be another bad time because they had always come in waves. And he was right. And Pharaoh was a genius because he had the right economic advisor. That's pretty good. The study of these cycles was something that lagged for many years, but it was first really set down and analyzed by a man named Nikolai Kondratiev. He is the father of business cycles and somebody who is accepted by capitalists the world over as somebody that's important. And his analysis are sometimes called K waves because people don't like to say Kondratiev. But Nikolai Kondratiev was a man who worked for, well, Vladimir Lenin. Kondratiev was a communist, and he worked on Lenin's first 5 year plan, for example. Now, there was a problem with this. When Kondratiev really looked at how everything moved in waves, his work was extremely unpopular, and he wound up being sent off to a gulag. We don't know exactly what happened to him. He died somewhere around 1922, very anonymously. No one knows what happened because it went against the prevailing Bolshevik theory of the time. But what he said is that a market based industrial economy goes through various cycles, and he called them the four seasons. Basically, there's two waves that go through a spring where everything blossoms, a languishing summer where things settle down into quiet patterns and there's something like stagflation, a fall harvest period that's the really good one, and then a winter depression when everything stops. The length of these cycles that he found was about 13 years. And he wasn't sure really why. I mean, it didn't quite follow agricultural cycles anymore, but he saw these even in industrial economies. Unfortunately, in the Soviet Union of his time, this was not acceptable. But it was picked up by business leaders all around the world, and we accept business cycles as a thing today. And if you want to go research K waves, you will see all kinds of crazy, amazing things predicting them. I mean, certainly there's the stock market goes up for a while and then flattens out, up for a while and then flattens out. We see these waves going through. But economics is a lot more than just the study of money. This is the one thing I really want to get through to everybody, is that economics really is sociology with a way of keeping score. Even in the Soviet Union, they had a way of keeping score. Your attitudes towards everything have something to do with your ability to get that money, that basic scratch to get by. The three kind of common views of money, again, are it's something that really limits you, that you have to get right now to pay the rent, or it's a way of keeping score among rich people who's doing better, or money is a way of getting things done. Now, a strong economy is going to have people who are mostly in the latter camp. I need money to get things done, to realize my dreams, to get that education, to have that nice house, whatever the goals are. But far too often we see people struggling to get by. And if you've struggled to get by most of your life, that's going to be your attitude. Especially if that's the situation when you were born. And this is where K waves become interesting. See, right now, business cycles are 17 to 18 years and perhaps even longer than that. And we can ascribe what we call generations in the United States to the very cycles that we're talking about. The baby boom, for example, went from 1948 to 1965, a period of about 17 years. It was a boom time. Everything was great, and the parents of the generation ahead of them, well, they doted on the baby boomers. They gave them pretty much everything they wanted because they could. And why wouldn't you? Right? Well, the next generation, Gen X, my generation, from 1965 to about 1983, was a time of things going south a little bit, as we discussed. The 1971 time when the dollar just plain broke, the oil crisis, stagflation in the 1970s. This shapes our attitudes even today, because we learned as kids that our parents couldn't afford things. Our parents had trouble. Money troubles are the number one cause of the breakup of families, right? People working too many hours, not seeing each other, not having the money to do what they need to do. It causes families to break. The next generation, the millennials, well, they came through in the 1980s. Things looked really good for them until 9/11. And now they've been in their adult life dealing with this crisis. They're going to have a very different attitude for things. And the generation which comes after, which was born in the year 2000, I can assure you, has a very different attitude altogether. See, economics is a lot more than money. It's about experience. It's about learning how to do things, learning how to cope, and the skills that make you productive. Economics is really about technology, especially in the developed world. Now, this has always been true. When we talk about agriculture, it is a culture. You learn it from your parents. You learn how to deal with the cycles of the seasons, the rhythm of the land, etc., and cope with it. But this is true very much today. And it's important to understand the cycles. Now, Kondratiev saw a cycle of about 13 years, and I just said a cycle of 17 to 18. And in fact, they might even be getting longer than that. What is this? Well, the 4 cycles, 2 up, 2 down, seem to correspond to one lifetime. See, in Kondratiev's time, people tended to live to be about 50-something. Today, people live to be close to 80. As the human lifespan increases, the length of the cycle seems to increase. This is something that we all kind of go through. But what are those business cycles? I mean, if they are really driving the world, what are they? According to the Fisher analysis, they are all about debt. Now, really, in ancient times, did you have a debt crisis? Well, actually, you did. The cycles of famine and boom time were tied to the land, and therefore the accumulation of debt was tied to the land. And they had a mechanism for doing this, dealing with this, called a jubilee, in which all debts would be forgiven by the king. All debts? Really? Well, most of the debts were owed to the king, so yeah, you could do it. But you would clear the table and sort of start over, pushing the reset button, having a new deal, can I say? This is something that goes all the way back to biblical times. It's been recorded in every society, and this happened in China as well, and Persia. It's very well documented in the ancient Hebrew times, and then she kind of tailing off of it. But it is something that we need to consider, a time when all debts are canceled and everything comes down. It's an interesting concept. But if these business cycles are really all caused by debt, Where are we now? Well, we're in a time of extreme debt by any measure. Now, if you look at the other views of economics that I talked about before, John Maynard Keynes wanted to talk about in these cycles, if we just saved up a whole bunch of money during the boom times, we would have money for the bad times. Sounds like Joseph, doesn't it? See, Keynes studied history too, okay? The problem we have is that we don't save up during the boom times. We don't want to put money away, so during the bad times, we take out more debt. So there is a good kind of Keynesianism that evens out the cycles a bit, and there's a bad kind that just keeps cycling up the debt and going. But what about that Friedman view that it's all about money supply, that the goal is to sort of even out the cycles, squash them down a bit? Well, that works very well unless you keep expanding the money supply and therefore expanding the debt during the bad times. See, Keynes and Friedman were really looking at different aspects of the business cycle, that Kondratiev cycle. Okay? They understood what he was talking about. Keynes wanted to do a direct intervention with it. Friedman wanted to try and level things out. But what Fisher tells us is that it's all about the debt. And it seems that Fisher was definitely right. I mean, if you can take either a Keynesian view or a Friedmanite view, doesn't really matter. And you can see in the different parts of the cycle that there are different times when one or more of them might be good. Stagflation in the 1980s, supply side economics was probably the right thing to do at that time. Okay? During the Depression, the Keynesian New Deal stimulus infrastructure program was probably the right thing to do at that time. But over the long view, where we see these cycles moving through everybody's life, what is the right thing to do? Well, if it's all left up to politics, remember that people are going to have attitudes based on what came before. And that's the problem. I don't mean to dump on experience. I mean, experience gives us skill. It's the heart of what creates technology. Okay? The ability to cope with the world we live in. Whether that world is a free market economy or a communist economy, people find a way to cope. And they learn things as they go. But their attitudes are always responding to what came before, and very often what they learned as children. That's where we get the cycles of generations. Again, economics isn't about money, things that have come and gone over the years. It's about what you learn. It's about what you do. The skills you develop. The productive skills, yes, but those basic coping skills, those things that bring you happiness in life. This gets to the heart of the difference between wealth and money. Because wealth is, in part, an attitude. It's having control over your life, being able to cope, being able to deal with things, means that you at least feel wealthier. Money? Well, money is useful to the extent that it describes your wealth, that it enables your wealth, that it makes everything better. But in a time of excessive debt, everything becomes much more difficult. And you develop an attitude of contraction. You're going to take care of business. You're going to focus narrowly on your family, get by day to day. That's kind of what we're doing right now, isn't it? We're surviving from one day to the next. And this period right now is going to shape everybody's life, especially younger people. We're going to see ripples of this for the next 70 years, without any question. But we are all changing our attitudes. That's important. What I want to do in this whole series is to help give a framework for understanding how our attitudes are going to change and what they mean with respect to the very real business cycles that we see. How long are these cycles? 17, 18, maybe even 20 years now. Lifespans are getting longer, or they have been. The other point is that you might just ignore what Kondratiev said because he was a communist. Well, good ideas come from many different places. I mean, if you don't like communists, how about talking about income inequality, right? Do you like dealing with the simple fact that far too much money is concentrated at the top of this world and not getting down to the bottom? You may have encountered the Gini index, Gini. It's pronounced Gini, and it's named for Corrado Gini. He is the father of the income distribution analysis, and he was an economist for Benito Mussolini. Good ideas come from all kinds of different places. You have to keep an open mind. And one good way to do that is to take a long view and to really think about the cycles, how the cycles have shaped your attitude based on how you got by on a daily basis, or how everyone else got by. What have we learned? What skills did we develop getting through? If you focus way too much on the day-to-day basis, you won't be able to thrive. And it should come, I think, as an obvious response that these business cycles, maybe we can't get rid of them, but can we at least make them smaller? I mean, that's kind of what Friedman was all about. Or can we ameliorate them somehow, do something like that was what Keynes was all about? And again, Fisher tells us they're caused by debt. In fact, history seems to tell us that as well. So what are your attitudes? What are you learning right now? What's going to change because of this getting by day to day, struggling? The world will change because of this, and the economy will change. And, well, the Soviet Union isn't around anymore, is it? People got tired of dealing with that. Things will change in the world. But in what way? Things will change for the better to the extent that we understand the cycles, we understand the march of technology and how it is deflationary, and we understand that money itself needs to change in order to accommodate a new world. These are really tall orders, but we have a lot of time on our hands, don't we? How will this influence our attitudes in the future? A lot depends on how we put this time to use. And an understanding of K-waves might be an interesting way to start. It kind of helps open up your mind a little bit. You can read way too much into it, but economics really is sociology. Everything really is about the skills you develop. If you take the view of technology, the study of skill, as broadly as possible, we all have skills. What are we learning that create the skills that we're going to be putting to use tomorrow? That's what we need to consider. Thank you, everybody.